was extremely eerie. It's dead quiet, it's misty, it's damp, it's everything, it's black. And as I looked down at the light, I could see the outline of his body. And I knew it wasn't going to be good.
DJ Gillis was one of 5 commercial divers sent to the end of the Deer Island Sewer Tunnel, deep under Massachusetts Bay. Part of the Boston Harbor cleanup, the tunnel had taken nearly a decade to build. During construction, it had extensive ventilation and lighting systems, as well as 55 safety plugs, designed to protect workers from the risk of a flood. But by the summer of 1999, the ventilation and lighting had been yanked out. All that remained were the safety plugs, which had to be pulled out too before the tunnel could be used. That job was left to divers, not because they would be submerged, but because they could do dangerous construction work in situations where they brought in their own air. Here's how it worked. 2 Humvees were lowered into a 400-foot shaft at the very start of the tunnel, where there was enough air to breathe without masks. The divers drove one Humvee into the tunnel and towed a second facing in the opposite direction for the ride back. They had been given an experimental mixed gas breathing system because it was easier to transport than other options and would allow them to work for longer shifts. After 9 miles, the tunnel got so narrow the Humvee could go no farther. 2 divers, Billy Juss and Tim Nordine, stayed there, monitoring the breathing system. The other 3, DJ, Dave Riggs, and Donald Hosford, who everyone called Hoss, trudged on foot to the cramped 5-foot-wide end of the tunnel and began removing safety plugs. They stayed connected to the Humvee through long breathing hoses and a communications wire. Trouble with the untested breathing system began after they started to pull the 4th plug.
I went down. I had been unconscious for I don't know how long. I came out of it foggy, groggy, and Riggs was right in front of me. We almost fell down looking face to face. I remember looking at Riggs and I could see through the faceplate his concern and confusion, and he starts, "What happened? What the f*** happened? What's wrong?" And I remember telling him right away, put my hand up and like, shh, shh, shh. We don't have much. Don't start talking and yelling and wasting your breath.
Hoss acted fast, switching on the emergency air for himself, DJ, and Riggs. By then, they had lost contact with Tim and Billy back in the Humvee.
But I remember thinking, we've got to get there as quick as we can, but don't exhaust our air supply.
It took more than 20 minutes to slog back to the Humvee. As the first vehicle came into sight, they expected a flurry of activity. But there was nothing. Dead silence. DJ spotted Billy, his close friend, lying outside the Humvee.
I approached him, and he was on his back, looking up. His eyes were open, but there was nothing in them.
From the way they were positioned, DJ could tell that Billy and Tim had been trying to switch the main breathing system to a backup supply.
That was their last efforts in their life. They were trying to save us, and I know that for a fact. Tim was waiting for Billy to give the okay to go ahead, and that's where they lost consciousness.
DJ was distraught when their efforts to revive Billy and Tim failed.
Now, the only person that I knew close, Billy, was dead. Now I'm with these strangers, more or less, but there's a camaraderie, but not the camaraderie I have with Billy.
With their primary air supply tainted, it became a question of how they would get out, and whether they would take Billy and Tim with them. They knew their mission was so dangerous that no one would be coming in to rescue them.
Riggs, I can tell, was wanting he just wanted to run. Human instinct, of course, and it took everything in me to not want to get up. I remember wanting to do the same thing. I remember looking down that shaft and just want to get the out of here. I want to go. But we couldn't leave them, and I also knew that we weren't going to get out one at a time. If we all took off, we weren't going to make it.
bulletin came across the TV and said that there'd been an accident at Deer Island. And I thought, oh my God, that's where DJ sat.
One summer morning 10 years ago, 5 divers were sent more than 9 miles into the Deer Island Tunnel, deep under Massachusetts Bay. Their job was to remove dozens of safety plugs that had protected the tunnel from flooding during construction. In a way, the entire Boston Harbor cleanup rested on their shoulders. But by the late afternoon, the news began to find its way to the divers' families that something inside the tunnel had gone terribly wrong.
Ken answered the phone, and I said, I know there's been an accident. Is Billy still alive? And he said, I'm afraid not.
Robin said, it's Tim. And then I just started crying. I told him not to go in that tunnel if he thought it wasn't safe.
As I came through the door, the phone was ringing. He asked if this was Donald Gillis's mother. I said, yeah. I said, don't tell me anything about DJ. I know what happened. I don't want to know if he's alive. Just tell me where he is. And he said at Mass General Hospital.
Donald Hosford, known as Hoss, had been foreman of a 3-man team removing the plugs at the end of the pitch-black tunnel. Sitting in a Humvee about 1,200 feet away, Billy Juss and Tim Nordine had been monitoring the divers' breathing air, which was supplied by an experimental mixed gas system. After trekking back to the Humvee, Hoss, Dave Riggs, and DJ Gillis were horrified to find Billy and Tim dead. The mixed gas system seemed like the likely cause, but because the valves to the backup air were also open, they couldn't trust that supply either. With the clock ticking, Hoss decided they would spend precious minutes loading the bodies for the return trip, but that trip was threatened even before it began.
The vehicle wouldn't start due to the oxygen content.
While Riggs tried to get the engine to turn over and DJ loaded equipment, Hoss stood behind the Humvee, next to the trailer they were using to transport the bodies.
At that point, you had a visual aid there to see what's going to happen to you if you don't get out of this tunnel.
With their air supply compromised, they switched to a different emergency backup system called rebreathers, which recycled air for up to 4 hours. But if they couldn't get the Humvee started, Hoss knew they'd never have enough air to walk the entire 9 miles out of the tunnel.
Basically, you had to go through your thought process of, this is it.
Finally, with a huge plume of smoke that filled the tunnel, the Humvee started. But to get back, they still needed to drive along miles of dangerous terrain, with 3 feet of standing water in some spots.
On the way back, you realize what had happened, what could have happened if the truck didn't start. You had 2 guys that were dead behind you that you were bringing out, and it wasn't a very pretty picture.
It took them about an hour and a half to get back to safety. Word of the deaths made it to Topside, and then to Doug McDonald, who ran the MWRA, the agency that owned the tunnel.
The call to come in to say, I've got bad news, we think we've lost 2 guys in the process, was just this emotional no. Do I get to wake up from this dream now? This is not happening.
The accident turned into a nightmare for many people, none more so than the families of the 2 divers who died and the 3 who managed to make it out alive. It took an additional year to devise a new way to ventilate the tunnel and remove the plugs. The new solution cost about 15 times as much as the first plan, but it got the plugs out, which allowed the tunnel to be flooded and the transformation of Boston Harbor to proceed. The survivors and victims' families have had a more difficult time moving forward, left to wonder why Billy and Tim were asked to give their lives when a less risky, though more costly, option could have been used. This summer, Billy's mom, Olga, and his sister came to Deer Island to mark the 10th anniversary of his death. This was Olga's first trip back to Deer Island since 2002, when memorial plaques and benches for Billy and Tim were unveiled.
When I did the memorial here and threw the flowers over, that was really when I buried Billy, because after that there was going to be nothing.
She threw the flowers again this time, after saying the same prayer for Billy and Tim that she recites every morning and every night. When she gazes out at that sparkling harbor, she can't help but feel pain.
People here should never forget the lives that were sacrificed to give them a clean harbor.